20,000. That's how many Roman soldiers were killed in a single disastrous battle. And believe it or not, that's not even the most shocking part of this story. You see, the Romans outnumbered their enemy by more than 4-1. We're talking 43,000 of Rome's finest legionaries going up against just 10,000 Parthian horsemen. On paper, this should have been an absolute slaughter. And it was, just not for the side you'd expect.
So you have to ask, how does that even happen? How does one of the greatest military machines in history get completely annihilated by a force that's barely a quarter of its size? Well, the answer isn't some brilliant new weapon or a once-in-a-generation general. No, this whole catastrophe comes down to one thing: one man's colossal ego. This is the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man so rich he could buy anything he wanted, except, as it turns out, the one thing he craved the most: glory. Okay, so who was this guy Crassus? Well, think of him in a few ways. First, he was unbelievably rich, a billionaire by today's standards. Second, he was a political kingmaker, the money behind guys like Julius Caesar. But the third thing, the thing that really defined him, was this burning, decades-long rivalry he had with Pompey the Great. See, Pompey had all the military fame, all the triumphs. Crassus just had the money. He was desperate to prove he wasn't just a rich guy, and he figured a quick, glorious war against Parthia was just the ticket. And let's be clear, this wasn't some noble war to defend the Republic. This was a completely unprovoked invasion for personal gain, and everybody in Rome knew it. The day he set off, a crowd literally blocked his path, yelling at him that this was all about his own greed. The irony? His rival Pompey had to show up and rescue him from the mob. You just know that had to sting. And right out of the gate, Crassus makes his first huge mistake. His ally, the king of Armenia, shows up with a genius plan. He says, hey, let's invade through the mountains. The terrain is perfect for your infantry. It'll neutralize their famous cavalry. And oh, by the way, I'll give you 46,000 of my own troops. He basically offered to double Crassus's army. And Crassus said no. Why? He wanted the fast track. A straight shot through the open desert meant a quicker victory and quicker glory. So he marches his army straight into the furnace of the Mesopotamian desert. He's pushing them so hard they're eating on the move, barely stopping for water. His own officers are begging him, "Sir, let the men rest. Let's find out where the enemy actually is." He just ignores them. He was convinced he was chasing a retreating army, but in reality, he was just walking his men deeper and deeper into a trap. So when his scouts finally race back, saying the enemy is here and they're all cavalry, Crassus starts to panic. Normal Roman doctrine would be to form a long, thin battle line to keep from being outflanked. Crassus threw that playbook out the window. Instead, he orders his legions into a giant, hollow square. Now, on the surface, it might sound smart. You can fight on all four sides at once, right? Wrong. It was completely unorthodox, and it was about to become a death trap. So what exactly were the Romans facing? First up, the Parthian horse archers. Now, these guys weren't just dudes with bows on horseback. They were lightning fast, and they carried these powerful composite bows that could punch right through a Roman shield. They could just dance around the battlefield, firing arrow after arrow, all while staying just out of reach of the Roman swords. But here's the real game changer. Usually, an archer runs out of arrows pretty quick, maybe 15 minutes of continuous firing. The Roman plan was simple: hunker down, raise the shields, and just wait for the arrow storm to pass. But the Parthian general, a guy named Surena, had a secret weapon. He'd brought a supply train of 1,000 camels, each one loaded down with thousands of extra arrows. The Romans were waiting for an attack that was never, ever going to stop. And this created a situation that was pure hell. The Romans are stuck in their square formation. It's basically a giant human pincushion. They can't move forward, they can't fall back. All they can do is stand there while a storm of arrows rains down on them from every direction, for hours. Men were getting their feet pinned to the ground, their arms pinned to their shields. That constant, terrifying sound of arrows thudding into wood and flesh must have been absolutely maddening. Crassus is watching his army get shredded. He has to do something. He turns to his son, Publius, who was actually a pretty talented young commander. He gives them the order: take the cavalry, take a legion, and charge, break the circle. It was a complete desperation play. And for a minute, it looks like it's working. Publius leads the charge, and the Parthians in front of him just break. They turn and they run. So Publius, full of confidence, chases after them, racing across the desert floor, getting further and further away from the main army. He thinks he's won the day. He couldn't be more wrong. The retreat was a trick. Because as Publius is chasing them, he runs straight into the Parthians' most legendary and most deadly tactic, the Parthian Shot. Imagine this, a warrior on a horse, galloping away from you at full speed, who can twist his entire body around and fire an arrow backward with pinpoint accuracy. Publius's men are being slaughtered while they're chasing an enemy that's supposed to be running away. And then it gets worse. The fleeing Parthians link up with fresh troops, swing around, and completely envelop Publius's force. He's now trapped in his own miniature death box, just like his father. He and his 5,800 men are surrounded and systematically cut to pieces. Publius, wounded and knowing it was over, had one of his own men kill him to avoid being captured alive. Back at the main square, Crassus has no idea any of this has happened. He's actually getting the whole army ready to march out and support his victorious son. And that's when he sees them. The Parthians ride up, and they're carrying a message for him. It was on the end of a spear. It was his son's head. In that one horrifying moment, whatever was left of the Roman army's will to fight just evaporated.
What came next was a total meltdown. That night, the Romans fled in chaos, leaving thousands of their own wounded behind to be butchered. Crassus himself was a broken man, just huddled on the ground, completely catatonic. His own soldiers, now in full-blown mutiny, basically forced him to go negotiate a surrender. That meeting turned into a bizarre, confusing scuffle, and in the chaos, Crassus was killed. But the Parthians had one last, grimly poetic insult for the billionaire who started this war. Legend says they took his severed head, melted down a bunch of gold, and poured it down his throat, a final, gruesome joke about his insatiable thirst for wealth. The final numbers were just staggering. 20,000 Romans dead, another 10,000 captured and marched off into slavery. And worst of all, the legions lost their sacred eagle standards, the ultimate symbol of Roman honor. To rub salt in the wound, the Parthian general staged a fake Roman triumph back home, using Crassus' head as a prop. It was, without a doubt, one of the most humiliating defeats Rome ever suffered. But the story doesn't end there, on that bloody desert plain, because the real, lasting impact of this one battle would be felt thousands of miles away, and it would change the course of Roman history forever. See, to really get why this matters so much, you have to understand the politics back in Rome. At the time, the Republic was being held in this very delicate balance by three men. You had Caesar with his armies, Pompey with his political connections, and Crassus with his bottomless pits of money. Crassus was the financial glue holding his two ambitious rivals together, and with him dead, that glue was gone. The whole thing fell apart. You can draw a straight line from this battle to what happens next. Crassus's death creates a massive power vacuum. Pompey, now the sole remaining powerhouse in Rome, starts cozying up to Caesar's enemies in the Senate. The personal rivalry between the two biggest names in Rome, which had been kept in check by Crassus's influence, was now totally unrestrained. The path to civil war was wide open. So here's the bottom line. The Battle of Carrhae wasn't just a military disaster. One man's obsessive, arrogant quest for personal fame led directly to a catastrophe that took the single most important balancing force out of Roman politics. It didn't just lose a battle. It cracked the very foundations of the Roman Republic itself. And really, it leaves us with a question that's as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. The story of Crassus is ancient, but the theme feels awfully familiar. What happens when the ambition of a single, powerful individual is allowed to run wild, completely unchecked? And what's the price that everybody else has to pay for it?